So I'm here with Joe Sarling for the second of our two episodes, as Joe offers his reflections as he departs the formal role that he's been playing in Greater Manchester Moving for the last 18 months. And this particular conversation is going to be more focused on the kind of leadership required, really, and then particularly the organisational sort of role in creating the conditions for the leadership that is needed in this kind of work. So if you haven't listened to the first conversation yet, I would suggest you do that. But if you're particularly interested in the kind of mindsets, ways of working, values, behaviours and practices that are most conducive to leading and supporting and connecting this work, this is what we're going to dive into now. And Joe, in the last episode, you talked about a potential weakness. I see it as a massive strength of being in a room and being able to hold in mind the movement and the whole strategy implementation, but then also being really focused at times on the organisational role and contribution to that. So I'm going to ask you in the same sense to reflect on leadership, mindsets, behaviours, ways of working. And you can start where you want, really, in terms of like out there in the system, you know, as a whole that we all need, and then perhaps, or start from what have you noticed? What did you notice when you first joined the organisation? What drew you to it? You know, going back to that first interview moment,
yes, or
even the application process, and perhaps a bit like we did before. Like, what did you think it was, and then what is it actually? So where do you want to start? Do you want to go organisational and then out, or the other way around? I'll leave it to you.
No, let's just begin, because I think there's lots of different elements there, and it perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about, right? Everything is connected. Let's think in a holistic way, and culture is at the heart of all of those things. One of the things I would say just to begin is, yes, I did find that thinking about Greater Manchester Moving as an organisation and Greater Manchester Moving as the movement, and in particular in action, I found it a weakness. And the reference point there is a reflection of my own potential inability to swing between them easily to begin with, because I think actually it's a huge strength to be able to do that, and you and actually all of exec and the whole team could do that very easily and well. And that was probably my biggest lesson, actually, is being able to swing between those two things interchangeably, making sure that I can make those points in certain ways. So maybe that's a nice place to begin, actually, in a sense, because for me to get to grips with that to begin with, actually, because there was huge confusion, not only because it's the very similar names and so on, and that's an obvious point, but I was very used to representing either an organization or representing a viewpoint, or indeed representing a product or whatever it might be. Less used to doing both of those things. And that was always the difficulty. And I think going slightly around the houses here, the way that I was able to learn how to do that quite so well was two things. One, I got to ask lots of questions, and part of that comes from yourself, right? As in, are you confident enough to ask questions, however silly they might sound or whatever, or you might think that they are? But that also comes from the organisation and the people you work with, i.e., you're all saying, ask the questions. It doesn't matter. Like, someone else might be thinking it, and even if they're not, we want to be able to tell you something or teach you. And there's a trust in that relationship that has to be built very quickly, that allowed me to be able to ask lots of questions about, oh, this is what that means from an organizational perspective, or that's what this means from a movement perspective. And so, to come kind of full circle on that, building that trust, having that relationship with different people as quickly as possible, just is really effective and efficient. If you're looking purely at a productivity kind of perspective, it just makes everything much easier and quicker. But B, it generates a safe space to be able to start talking about things. And I came to this organization not having worked in a system change kind of way before, certainly not worked within Greater Manchester before. And so I came with obviously my own skills, perspectives, so on and so forth, but knowing that I would have to ask lots of questions to be able to get up to speed quickly. And the role that, as episode 1 spoke about, the role I came into was originally going to be, a years-long maternity cover, which meant, if I want to do good things here, and also make an impact, I need to learn as much as possible quickly. So you have to be able to ask those questions. So, fundamentally, the foundations for that are relationships and trust and safe space, and yeah, how recognizing different people's values and different people's values, sorry, and you, exec, the organization were all really interested in like, who's this guy and what's what's his background and what makes you tick, and vice versa. And I think that's where I suppose that's where the magic happened, actually.
It made me smile because I was thinking back to the first. I don't think it actually started yet, but you came to a meeting, and then we had a lime and soda in the sun outside of
Yes.
Piccadilly Station.
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation, and because we were talking there about, as I would call it, how you would know when you were creating value for the work. And just do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your reflections on that too, because I remember that, and it was a nice sunny day and really early on. So coming full disclosure here, I was coming into the organisation. I knew that it was a 12-month kind of deal, but I also wanted to generate some value, and I took the view that actually the best way forwards, and that I felt safe to be able to do so, but the best way forwards here was to be as honest and as open and as transparent as possible. And so, you never know how that's going to go. But you and I sat down for the first time and we spoke about, well, actually, look, here's who I am. And I, wanted to learn. You knew I wanted to learn. I love learning. I need to be able to learn new things, and that's how I feel like safest and happiest, and so on and so forth. But also I need to know that I'm adding value, and I need you to be able to tell me that I'm adding value, and I need to feel like I'm recognized in that, and that I'm on the right kind of path, and having that feedback is really important to me. I also told you that I'd never taken a maternity cover role before, or any kind of cover role before. So I described to you, I've always built things. I've not been a steward for things before, and that felt very odd, and in some ways quite uncomfortable, because you want to progress the work. You don't want it to be on fire when the person comes back, and that would be, so there's an added level of different kind of pressure there, as well as my own kind of need and maybe insecurity to feel like I'm adding value as early as possible. So being as open and transparent with you as possible, to be able to say, here's where I am, I felt like the right kind of thing to do, and it felt entirely reciprocated. You understood exactly what I needed and how I needed it, and what that looked like, and what my learning opportunities would be. I was entirely upfront that I have gaps over here, and I need you to help me fill them, or at least signpost. But I have these skills over here that I can add to that, and I just need some time to be able to translate. And I felt like our working relationship in that, well, our relationship in general, right? But our working relationship was really strong to be able to do that, and that kind of set the right kind of tone. But you can only do that if you feel safe to be able to do it. If you didn't feel like you were going to be judged, or you weren't going to jeopardize something, or whatever it might be. And I certainly had that. And yeah, off the back of that conversation and others, I think that we built a really strong foundation for lots of that work. Is that how, what are the things that you took away from our conversation?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to reflect on, actually. And I think, as I recall it now, and I think the sort of road we've travelled since then, it strikes me just how, in that moment, your absolute openness and like vulnerability, and telling me exactly how you felt in coming into the role and the maternity cover aspect of it, like you've just said, created a space which I don't think I've experienced before, which has unlocked a whole load more value than it would have done if you hadn't been honest about it. Because that was like permission and invitation for me, I think, to keep that conversation going. And I think my initial reflection was, well, you've already created value by asking great questions, because that process of someone asking you questions and you having to articulate something, explain something to somebody, helps you to clarify it in your own mind. And I was sort of experiencing that already in our conversations. I also think that, because we created almost like that was the deal then, that your job was to, in this period where you were still a vaguely like outsider to the team and coming in, there was this window of time, which something I've learned to think, is that there's this window of time where someone is an outsider enough to ask really clean questions and observe things without any attachment to them, which is like a kind of balcony dance floor thing of like being on the balcony, because you're coming onto the dance floor, but you are still able to sort of observe it a little bit. So I think that's just unlocked something in my learning, which has been like, that's so valuable. And anytime anyone joins the organisation since, I've explained that to them, like, oh, we've realised that this is a really important period of time before you get so in it that you're vested in it, you know, and you're sort of
Yes.
protecting the status quo or justifying or
Yes.
proving something to somebody. So, and then I guess that's how I would sort of see it now. It's almost become like a chip in my head, which is this is a phase of somebody's onboarding that creates value in and of itself. So you need
Yep.
to create the conditions for that as much as you possibly can.
That's nice.
And it's enabled me to ask more whenever I meet a new member of the team for their interaction with me. I'm much more mindful of asking questions about, well, what will help you to feel like you belong here, and what will help you to feel like you're creating value, which aren't questions I'm necessarily, you know, was so deliberate about in the past. And then the final thing I would say, and then I'll come back to you, which is that sort of, I think we advertise, recruit, and onboard people very much with the how in mind, the behaviours, the mindsets, the capabilities, the ways of working, because we have evidence that demonstrates how important that is to this work. So then I guess the question back to you is sort of then in the next 18 months that followed, what should have been your experience of the how, and the how important are those values, mindsets, behaviours, ways of working, and why are they so important to actual progress and impact in this work?
Yes, great series of questions. Lots to unpack there. And before I dive into some of the reflections there, I'd like to hear your kind of point too. But one of the big things for me is when you start a new role, I think I've learned more than any other place that it's such a unique moment in time, just to echo what you were saying, such a unique moment where you are part of the group, but not quite. So you're still much more objective. And that sometimes, and in previous places I've worked, that can be seen as a bit of a threat until you've been institutionalized, until you've become normalized in it. And actually it's not. Like that's where the gold is, because they're part of the team, but they have this clarity of either question asking or perspective or value, or depending on where they come from, what that use would be. As soon as they become like fully embedded in everything, then you lose that because they're fully embedded. So yeah, really highlighting what you've said and what I've taken from my experience of being on that side. When I then move over to a recruitment side in the future, I'm absolutely conscious of that. This is a huge moment for us all to kind of learn and reflect and so on. So the learning has happened both ways there. To kind of riff off that and your question, how's the ways of working been important going forwards? I mean, it's been absolutely crucial. I think there are a few things. The first is authenticity is vital in this work. Authenticity and trust. And you've got to have this level of humility that allows you to ask lots of questions, which demonstrates that you don't have all of the answers, which I think is a great human quality to have in general, but particularly for this work. But it also allows other people, it gives permission to other people to ask questions too. You are living that kind of value. The authenticity point is you have to be able to demonstrate what you are and who you are. And, there's an integrity point there. You're going to do what you say you're going to do and so on. But all those things build trust, and trust is really important in this. This is a relational game. Like, we don't make widgets and sell widgets. We are talking to people in different parts of the system so that we can all move forwards together. Sometimes that works in large strides. Sometimes it's very small steps. Sometimes it's incremental. Whatever it might be, it relies on a relational nature. And all of those things, I think, and it sounds really obvious and almost silly to say, but I think it's just about being a really good human, actually. I think lots of the fundamentals here of trying to affect this change is being a non-judgmental, good human that recognizes that somebody wants to make an impact or improve things over there, and I want to make an impact and improve things over here. Could we work together to impact things together? And I think there's something about that. But the one of the things I always keep thinking, and the last 18 months has really kind of demonstrated this, is the phrase that trust is given in teaspoons but lost in buckets. Like, it takes a long time to build trust. It takes a long time. Like, the number of calls I'd have with individuals within the system just to build up a rapport and so on, to make sure that we had an understanding and so on and so forth, which is vitally important. But if if you were to lack authenticity or lack integrity, you'd lose that in an instant and you have to start all over again. So it requires you to live values. And lots of organizations say that they live values. Um, and not many do in my experience. And this one absolutely does, because it's absolutely crucial to our work. There's a relentless focus on relationships, a relentless focus on culture. And so if I think about what that means working in a system, i.e. outside of our organization, if you are living those values, then you are also living them internally. And I think that's what GM Moving does in spades. And to come back to the authenticity point, maybe the integrity point, how we operate with partners is how we operate internally. There's humility, there's no judgment, there's a recognition that we all have something to add. There's a perspective that I haven't seen or heard yet. And so let's have a conversation to see what that looks and feels like. There's something really important there. And then there's another layer, there's a depth there, which is if you work out in the system like this, and then you work internally like this, and that is the foundation in which you do all of this good work, then actually everybody owns the culture. Everybody's responsible. I've heard in various different organizations, they have a stake in this and so on and so forth. Like there's a real ownership here that if you as an individual mess this up in some way, then somebody else will call you out for that, because it's so important to us. It's so fundamental to us and good work that we are all responsible and we all own it. So there's lots to kind of unpack there, and I think it's really important. One of the things, just to come very briefly, just one of the things that you said earlier too, just as a quick reflection that you might want to ask about, is one of the reasons I wanted to come and work with you is, and I don't know if I've revealed this to you or not, we might have done that over the lime and soda, but I did a huge amount of due diligence before coming to join you. Basically consisted of asking other people not in GM Moving, is GM Moving actually like how it says it is, and what I've heard. And you'll be very pleased to know that everybody said, yes, absolutely, go ahead. So the due diligence was really easy and we moved on very quickly. But the culture is so strong that we are known for it. And so therefore, that's a real unique selling point for us, and we get things done, which is really important. The thing I wanted to tell you, though, is that when you first start, that makes it incredibly easy and incredibly hard all at once. So the incredibly easy thing is, you feel like you can ask lots of questions and you'll get to chat to people, and that's great. And that people automatically come and talk to you. They just want to know you. It's the good human thing. Nice and easy. It's been the easiest onboarding from that perspective that I've ever had. Great. Met everybody. What makes it super tough is that you're all really close. Like you all know each other super well. And it's particularly the case in exec as well, given I was the first person to come in for a little while, that you feel like, and not in a bad way, but you were at the first family Christmas dinner that you've been invited to. And you want to make a good impression, and you have something to add and value, and they all want you there. Like you don't feel like you're not wanted, but also everybody's got their own jokes. And so, for a little period of time, you're laughing along, and you're just waiting for that moment where you've had enough experience and time together that you've suddenly got your own jokes with everybody. And so it's absolutely vital, and I wouldn't pick it any other way. But as an onboarding thing, and for anybody that comes to come and work at GM Moving, that's maybe how it might feel a bit. But it's absolutely great, because you'll be part of that family very soon and very quickly.
That's really made me look. I'm just wondering what your secret Santa gift might be. I was so conscious that I know we were very, very conscious of that. We'd had an exec team for 5 years that had, gone through a pandemic together, restructured the organisation, gone through a whole load of stuff together. And you were the first person to kind of join that group. And I remember being really, really conscious of how do we help you to belong in that group of 5, as well as in the wider organisation. And what would that take? And I just think that there's been so much learning in that. The most important bit of it for me was just naming it and being honest about the fact that was a risk. And I think we even talked about it in the interview from memory. When we talked about, well, what are the risks in this, and how, and the nature of maternity cover being a short-term thing and so on. And I think it's just another really good example of like when there is some potential risk or conflict or tension in something, you take probably 80% of it away by talking about it,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then just keep talking about how it's feeling. And I know you and I talked a lot about that in the early months of your sort of
Yeah,
like in one-to-ones and in day-to-day conversation. Um, and I think it's again, it's a learning that I will hold on to. It's something that's become a bit wired in for me about how you do that most effectively. And part of it links to what we were saying before about giving you a very clear role in those early meetings with the exec team,
yes,
even down to the point of if your role is to ask really like really good questions, because God,
yeah.
that was amazing. That was amazing to have someone in the room, slightly on the balcony, just
Mm,
observing for a little while and asking questions, but gradually integrating in, and
yes.
being a part of it and becoming the butt of the jokes, or you know
Yeah,
and just that sense of belonging that comes with time, at the pace
yeah,
at which that can move. And then equally, when Beth's rejoined back from maternity leave, we reform again in a slightly different
yeah.
set of dynamics, haven't we? So that's been really fascinating to me.
Mm.
I
Don't
guess
don't
the
under don't
sorry,
undervalue or underprice your role and exec's role, and then the whole organization's role in that. Creating that space that doesn't require that didn't require me to ask for it, that you created it, is incredibly powerful. Like the empathetic value that demonstrates is so large. Like, we are going to create this space, we're going to create this time. We want you to be able to ask these questions. We recognize, we see and we hear you, that this is all new to you. So let's work together, and how do we both learn about each other? And I think that's incredibly powerful. The other thing I'd reference very briefly is, um, in coming into the role, as an individual how you prefer to work, but you don't yet know A, how other people like to work, and B, how the organization does its best work. So, you might have a particular view on how you want to work, but actually that doesn't get stuff done in the way that you need it to get done. And in which case, there's always this kind of recalibration process going on. And I think as an individual, again, anybody coming into the organization, just be open and honest about that and talk about it. You'll have a preference for a way of working or whatever it might be, and it could be absolutely anything. You prefer to read things rather than listen to things, or whatever it is, or you have certain working kind of schedule, or whatever it might be. Just be open and honest, because there's always a really, really good way that everybody can come together. And in this organization, there's always a happy medium for everybody to do their best work. And I think that's really powerful. I've certainly recalibrated how I work to do my best work now within this organization. But I hadn't been here long for that to happen. And that's a huge testament. Normally, there's an onboarding process, and in the first year, you're like, oh, great, okay, he's finally onboarded. Second year, maybe he'll do some work now. Like, we partly through necessity, we didn't have that. Partly through the type of the work, we didn't have that time. But for that effectiveness and efficiency together, like, very quickly, we worked out a formation, consciously and subconsciously, that, oh, this is how we do our best work together. That's a really powerful thing. But it requires you to think of me. It requires me to be open and think of the organization.
and if you were going to think out beyond the exec team into the whole organization, the organization's grown a lot in the last few years. As it's got bigger, the risk is that some of the sort of like sense of family, community, real integral values and behaviors might have risked getting lost. But as we've grown, actually, I think it's got stronger. But I guess I'm thinking about what are the lessons and learnings here for other organizations of different sizes. What have you seen and felt and heard that sort of designed into the sort of DNA of this organization that you think,
Mm.
that's how you create the conditions for people to do this kind of work, and to create the conditions for that culture? What is there anything that's transferable, do you think?
Oh, for sure. There's a whole range of different things. So, you know, all the kind of um, trust, integrity things that we've already spoken about is the solid foundation. Built on top of that, I think there's a natural curiosity. If you can inspire and encourage people to be curious about things, then you create the conditions for people to connect their work with other work. And that could be across teams, or it could be organization to another organization, but you create this curiosity for different perspectives, which I think is really important. And that builds the incentive to build bridges, I think, to different people and organizations. And then there's something about being, maybe I was going to describe it as being innovative or inventive, perhaps, but maybe it's much more about agency of what is it, how do you think you're going to achieve what it is that you, team X, want to achieve? And what do you want to do within it? Like, go forth. And if team X thinks its best route to drive its impacts to its priorities and so on is actually to work with team Y, and you've given them space to be able to say, yeah, go forth, that's amazing. Like, you reinforce the curiosity point, you reinforce the relationship and collaboration kind of point. And there's something really powerful about that. And I think there's always a risk when an organization grows to a size and then a certain size that it loses some of its connectivity. I think the organization's relentless focus on culture and that everybody owns it. I don't think it would ever come to a problem like that again if everybody holds dear. But equally, there's an element of as each team gets larger, individual teams then get more and more united and bonded individually. So creating the conditions for that curiosity and collaboration and that agency to go forth and work together to deliver things, and knowing that there's no single way you can achieve the positive impact. There are lots of ways you can achieve a positive impact, and giving teams and organizations that kind of perspective, I think is really important. And I think that's always the downfall that larger organizations fall into the trap of. It becomes very siloed, becomes very KPI focused to drive output. There's no sense of curiosity, there's no sense of collaboration, there's no sense of holistic thinking. And then you become just a series of organizations within one organization. If you work in the way that we work, it breaks those down, but that it relies on values and principles. It's not something that can just come top down. It has to be inbuilt. And that's why, coming full circle, recruiting on the basis of how people are and their values and how they like to work and their, how they operate and so on is so crucial. That keeps that secret sauce alive.
When you described it as being like a family earlier, I was a bit like, bristle a little bit because in a sense of what's on my mind is a fear that looking in from the outside, it's this kind of like, I don't know, this kind of space that would be hard to infiltrate. And I think you've spoken to that a lot, but almost that it could be a bit of like groupthink or a sort of bit of a closed shop. I don't know what's kind of, I'm struggling to articulate it, but as you were talking, I was thinking about the diversity of people, personalities, preferences, and that we have within the team and within the exec team, and what a strength that is from my perspective. So what have you noticed about how do we, and how could we even better like embrace and draw on the strengths of people from all sorts of different perspectives and preferences? So what's good already, but what also could we do more or differently, better?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. So let me take the first bit first, because I almost bristled saying family too when I said it. And lots of organizations say, oh, we're like a family. And I think they mean it in the worst possible sense, which is like, as you say, this cliquey cult. And it's not like that here. And when I said family, I meant it in the sense of you've got a whole range of different individuals that know each other very, very well, that know what makes each other tick very well, but you've got very different perspectives. You're not all, it's not a homogenous group. No family is a homogenous group in my experience anyway. So there's something about, what's the underlying principles of, in inverted commas, a family. And that's actually like, or it's probably about trust and a safe space, and to be able to air things. And actually you are different. And so you will have different kind of perspectives, and you'll go out into the world and then you'll come back at certain set piece moments, right? And that was my reflection around coming into exec and feeling like the first Christmas dinner. It was that, like, everyone's dispersed. Now they've come back. Okay, you've been out in the system. Now you've come back. What are we going to? And it's that, I think, that's most powerful, is that perspective, touch point, connectivity, all though with similar kind of value structure. And that's what I think is missing when other organizations talk about it, because they don't talk about it in that sense. They talk about it like we are one homogenous group, come into our cult. Whereas here, I feel like it's very different to that. It's much more, we have a shared understanding and way of working, and our, value structure is the following, broadly based around being good humans. But everybody's got their own different perspective, and that is valued, I think. And when I have conversations across different teams, there's a recognition that I'm going to add value to a conversation because I see the system from my vantage point, and vice versa. And that's a really powerful thing. The difficulty, I think, or the area that we could always improve, and I think every organization can do this, and it's not easy to do, and it's always difficult to kind of break down, is, there are obviously large shared commonalities across individuals who come to work at GM Movement, because we believe in the same things, right? We want physical activity, movement for all, focus on inequalities, and so on. And I think those things are right. But often those things are correlated with people with a whole bunch of other kind of viewpoints and outlooks. And so the question about how do you broaden even further that kind of perspective is really important. That diversity point that you reference. And so it could be focusing on, a locality kind of perspective, or where people are from, or what makes them tick, or where they work, or where they have worked before, or where their shared experiences have been in the past, and so on. It could be a whole bunch of other things, but having that at the forefront to make sure that, what's important to us is that we hear we have representation from everywhere, so that we can be most effective in affecting our change, and making sure that is as open as possible, that you spot those gaps where you have them, and that you actively seek to go and hear those views, whether you are able to bring them into the organization, i.e. you recruit them, or you make sure that you have different people within that kind of system to be able to talk to you about it. That will be crucial, but it's not easy to do, and opening it up as much as possible by talking about, principles and the movement that we want to do, I think starts to get somewhere close to that.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. That's really helpful to think about as well for where we go next. I've got we'll probably wrap up shortly, although I could talk all day here.
Sure.
I want to ask you, I've got two final questions here. The first one is one of, honestly, if you went back 18 months and were joining again, what would you ask me to do differently, or ask us to do differently, that would have been like the even better if for you?
Wow.
In this role?
Wow, that has put me on the spot. That's tricky. I'm struggling, genuinely and legitimately, because I do want to say I don't think there's much at all, because you considered exactly who I was, where I'd come from, what this might look and feel like to me, and we were open and transparent to work that out. In a working kind of way, and that built a huge amount of trust, and we added lots of value together. So I think one of the big difficulties is getting to grips with, again, this might be my own failing as well, remember, getting to grips with the scale of the work. So that, and by scale I mean breadth, really. Because anybody coming into the organization, and whether you've worked in system change or not, whether you've worked in GM or not, we are a small charity that I feel punches above its weight, both regionally and nationally. Which means there's a small number of people working across a huge range of topics, where individually those topics, people will spend their entire careers with it. And now all of a sudden, I'm like, whoa, hold on a minute. Suddenly I'm working across what was my viewpoint, right? Across 5 or 6 different departments. There's how many? Oh, there's one person over there doing this giant thing. So there was probably something for me about being able to better understand what those individual components are and then how they connect. And I think I got to grips with that over time, which is totally fine. That's part of the course because you get to talk to people, da, da, da. But a little bit of that kind of onboarding nature of, well, firstly, someone saying this is big and this is a lot, strap yourself in would be a great thing. And then to talk about the elements and how it's connected from a topic kind of perspective and not just a layer or tiers perspective, I think would be really helpful in being able to join dots because wherever, anybody coming in, you will typically have worked in one of those areas. You might have worked across multiple, which would be great. But if you've worked in one, like I had, then you are desperate to try and find links between any kind of knowledge you have from before and the other things that you're about to learn. And so, yeah, being able to have that kind of sit down talk or whatever it might be would have been really helpful, I think.
As always, you hold up a very clear mirror. Yeah, that is honestly, I'm glad I asked the question. That's a really interesting answer. It's not not necessarily where I thought you'd go actually. So that's really interesting.
Let me say as well that other organizations need to do this too.
Yeah,
it's just
sure.
No one's asking it. Like whenever you go and work, even in a large organization or whatever, I'm particularly thinking all of my roles from before, no one sat down and gone, right, here's how it's all connected and here's all the topics that we do. It's, well, I'll see you in 6 months' time and hopefully you've picked up some stuff.
It's I find it really interesting as well, and we know this sort of just from generally around onboarding people into the organization is like how you get them to see their bit, but how you get them to see all the other bits. But in this role in particular, or in the role that you're now in, not necessarily so much the one you came in to do, but the broader role that you're now in, like, but also just being part of the executive team and trying to see the whole. It's that thing, isn't it? Of what's my role in the whole, but also how much do I need to know about all the rest of the bits? And I think, and how do you paint the picture of all the rest of the bits sufficiently that because I remember early on, you and I in conversations where I would go, oh no, but don't you know that's going on over there? Well, of course you don't know because you haven't painted the whole picture and you can't possibly know all of what I can see from where I am. So it's really good. I don't know the answer to the question yet, but I'll ponder how and when do you drip some of that in without overwhelming somebody very early on with the enormity of it all. So it's really good observation.
I think that's really spot on, Hayley. That's spot on. Can I just add just very briefly? Sorry, I think that's spot on because there's a real risk and danger of overwhelm because it is just a lot. It's all just a lot, and so you just have to have time. And you gave me time to be able to learn that, and that's really valuable too. One of the things I really did value from our early conversations and throughout us working together was you recognizing that I'm going to come to you with some questions about either this is how I see this, or I've read this and thought this. And you've gone, okay, here we go. Let's spend 15 minutes. Here's some history. So rather than teaching me all of the history once, which would just be entirely overwhelming, you created a space which allowed me to go, this is what I see. Can you tell me whether this is right or wrong? And whichever one that is, can you tell me about some of the history? And you do that. And that helped me fill in the gaps way quicker than in any other organization I've been part of before. You recognize that I will need to learn some of the history and how things have come to be at some point, but you've not overwhelmed me with it because I'd just never take that in, would I, at the start?
Yeah, no, it's good to remember that how much of that we did actually, and how, and honestly, that if I'm, being candid, is that sort of like in those moments having to like take a bit of a breath and go, okay, right now I need to create some space and time to have this conversation. And like, when things are busy, that's not always easy, but I do see how valuable and needed it is in something that just, actually is quite huge. The kind of question is around like as you go forward into your new role, and we use the inner development goals in the organisation, don't we, quite a bit around, what are you. My question is kind of, what are you going to take into your future role as a leader and as a manager of people, a of culture and conditions yourself? Like, what are you going to be either thinking about or doing in the future because of what you've experienced, I guess, and learned?
Yes, a really great question. So some things that I've learned that have been brand new to me since being here, and some things that I had in my head from previous, leadership roles and so on, that have become cemented in my head that are important. And that's a really nice thing. It's a nice kind of journey to be on. So the first is, I think, creating the conditions as a phrase is something that I'm always just going to use now. And I hadn't used that kind of phrasing since before starting here, but I use it all the time now, and it's so important, and it helps me keep on the straight and narrow. That in any leadership kind of role, you don't have to have all of the answers. Indeed, it's important that you don't have all of the answers, but you can ask the right kind of questions. And so, if it's all about asking the right kind of questions, then how do you create the conditions for you to be able to do that? And that is making everything as relational as possible, because when things are going well, you could have poor culture and it would all stay on the road. When things are difficult or challenging, or you come up against a roadblock or whatever it might be, that's when the test of culture happens. And I think this place has absolutely shown that having that strong culture and trust and relationship with people allows you to overcome things that may well be roadblocks for other organizations, but are mere bumps in the road for us. And so I would absolutely take that forwards too. One of the big kind of maybe practices or processes is reflective practice. Again, as you've already alluded to, you recruit people with certain values and ways of working and so on. And so I've always known that I've been self-reflective, but have not used reflective practice in the way that we use here before. And the notion of whether you succeed in something or not, whether you move something forwards or not, in by doing the thing you're going to learn, is an incredibly freeing thing to recognize. And that I want to take that into any team I lead or organization I lead in the future, because, trying to do something, it not going well, you learn from it. Trying to do something, it going well, you're going to learn from it. So let's keep talking about those things. And I think broadly, it's the organizational culture related reflective practice that I will take most and I hold most dearly, because you nip things in the bud, you make improvements, you're constantly calibrating. You never think, we never think that we've solved culture here. Like, it's something that lives and breathes and that every day you work at. And that, just knowing that, is incredibly freeing. So let's just all work on it together until issues kind of disappear in that sense. The final thing I'd say is, having worked in a whole system organization and a system change organization, yes, all those things are important that I've stated, around building trust and so on. But actually, I genuinely do think, and the thing that's been cemented in my head is, humility is absolutely the thing that I'll hold on dear to. You finding that balance between being self-assured and loud and proud to be able to say something that from your own experience is true. Finding that balance between that and, do you know what, I don't know, or I've not heard of that before, or can you talk to me about, is an incredibly difficult balance to find, I think, and that people don't lean into sufficiently. And humility to be able to find that balance between the two things is the thing that I'll hold on dear, and I will continue to work at. It is something that we'll all continue to work at.
I'm smiling because I have to offer back to you that louder and prouder will be one of your lasting legacies for me. But that balance can be out of kilter either way, can't it?
Yes.
And you talked about that in the first session about, particularly when people are looking to how do you do this work with impact, with efficiency, create value. I need to recognize that we have learned a lot.
Yes.
There's a long history and a depth of a story and a breadth of a story here, and evidence and evaluation, and that actually we need to recognize, like, there's a responsibility. We've got a responsibility to
Yes.
be more, call it louder and prouder, or more assertive, or more assured in sharing that, using it, pointing to it. I think is one of the things amongst many that you have challenged us on in the last 18 months in a really, 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 really positive way. And that's why love doing these two conversations actually, because it sort of holds us to account for not forgetting some of the things that you've held a mirror up to. Because whilst you've been absolutely in the organisation, created loads of value in the organisation, you have maintained, and it's, I think, just your personality as well, and your strength as being able to be still that slightly objective, slightly step removed, curious, and asking good questions, but also not being afraid to challenge some of our entrenched kind of ways of working and being, that have made life both difficult and joyful for me personally over the last 18 months as well. So I just want to say a massive thank you. As you know, we write poems. I write poems for people as they part this organisation. I am so enjoying what people from the team are sending me, observations about you and about who you are, how you do what you do, and everything. That is both, hilarious and also really powerful, because I think when somebody's only in an organisation for a relatively short amount of time, the ease with which the team have been able to offer up contributions and to what they appreciate and will miss about you is I think, it's a sort of indicative of your openness of spirit and the fact that you've come in and you've let people get to know you really well, and joined in with this craziness that we done, the dancing on the dance floor. So yeah, massive thank you for making the time to do your exit interview publicly. Any final reflections from you before I let you off the hook?
Oh no, thank you. Look, it's been an absolute joy. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a huge amount. I've met some incredible people, yourself included, and it has been amazing. I've had my own kind of viewpoints challenged. I've self-reflected about different things. I've become a better person for having worked here, and I think that's probably the absolute testament to having come. And there's a particular moment in my career that I wanted to step in and work with you all and do this kind of work, and it was absolutely the right moment. It was the right place at the right moment, and I'll be desperately sad to move on going forwards. But I now, as I've said to others, I now get to champion this from a different part of the system, in a different way, and I get to become part of the GM Moving alumni. So I'm very happy about that. It's a special group. And the whole organisation has been amazing. I've really enjoyed working across different topics, different sectors, try to understand different things that I've genuinely never worked in before, that suddenly somebody with lots of experience can talk to me about. That's been incredible. Well, it's been mind-blowing, all the way from this is amazing to wow, this is overwhelming. I cannot keep everything in my head, desperately trying to squeeze more knowledge in there. So thank you to you, the exec team, everybody else. It's been an absolute joy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the dance floor tomorrow.
Quite right.
Cheers, Joe.
Thanks.